and Maiaha. Welcome to everyone that has joined us today. My name is Nick Muscali and I work for Chorus and have done for the last 10 years. Rolling out a fibre network nationally gave me a crash course in the National Code of Practice for utility access to transport corridors, or more affectionately, the Code. It developed a real appreciation for the balance of the Code looks to achieve with the regulatory rights of both utilities and corridor managers. And I've been part of the board of the New Zealand Utilities Advisory Group for almost 8 years in the 5th utility spot. Pass over to my partner in crime, Ian, who represents the other side of the coin, to introduce himself.
Good morning, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Ian Cox, and as Nick just said, I represent the corridor managers. I'm the board's representative for the government roading sector. I'm a principal advisor for Waka Kotahi, the New Zealand Transport Agency. And as such, I have an overview of our corridor management team, the ones who are dealing with the representations to us from the utilities industry, and for providing approvals to have access to the road network. Nick, if you would like to start us off.
Thanks, Ian. As you may have already noticed, this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on our website throughout the code review process. The webinar is 90 minutes long and we have grouped the presentation into 4 sections with a break for questions at the end of each section. We encourage you to put your questions into chat and we'll look to answer these at the end of each section. With time being a factor, we may not get to all questions, but we'll provide responses through our website. The webinar will focus primarily on the code review, so I ask you to respect the differing levels of understanding participants will have. The code review has been launched during the Road Infrastructure Conference at the end of July. It was launched by our board member from Waipaha District Council, Dawn Inglis. All the documentation can be found at the link noted at the bottom of the slide, including this presentation. Ian will provide a bit more detail later on this.
Now, Nick, I'm not sure. Suddenly we've got a box that's appeared over top of your presentation. I wondered if you tried to reshare your screen again, whether that box might then disappear.
That box disappeared now?
Now it's gone.
Yep, sorry, it was just your recording.
All right.
Little note, so apologies about that. Look, I'll present the first section and then hand over to Ian for the remainder. I'll keep him on his toes like a good utility operator and also manage Q&A through the chat function. The objectives for this session. As I mentioned earlier, we will not be delving into the code in detail, but we will be focusing on some of the issues that we have seen raised during previous code reviews or workshops that do not seem to have been addressed in previous reviews. We are keen to hear your perspective on these, either through the chat function and as time allows during the question time. We also want to hear what is working and why. Often this can be overlooked, where learnings from areas that are working well can be transferred onto areas where the desired outcomes are not being reached. We will document this and make it available on the code review site to enable others to use in their submissions, including a recording of this session. Ian will also confirm how and when you can make these submissions. So, I mean, these are the issues that we're going to provide a bit more detail in today. This isn't an exhaustive list of all issues, and we're keen to hear any others you'd like to raise. But these are some of the subjects that we have seen raised to us over the past few years. So a key one dear to my heart, and one of the issues originally presented to the Minister of Infrastructure as a reason to establish a third-party national code of practice, was the prevalence of third-party strikes on utility infrastructure. After more than 10 years, it is still unclear how much of an impact the code has had in this area, and the industry has an opportunity here to make some good progress on how, as we now have some good buy-in from our significant partners who recognise the benefit of reducing service strikes. I'll touch on this a bit in some of the latest slides, but our partners see the code as a significant mechanism to take the outcomes from these initiatives forward. Therefore, the NZUAG needs its industry members to input on this issue to ensure that what goes forward is fit for purpose. And your own ideas and experience in this area are of great value to ensure that the outcomes are acceptable across the board. I must admit, I was rather surprised in the news with the local government candidate who managed to put a billboard through the Chorus network. And while that didn't surprise me, what did surprise me is whether that has actually hindered or helped his campaign. We'll obviously find out soon in the election. So, as I touched on before, this is something that's been front and centre for the NZUAG for a fair amount of time, and we've recently partnered with Civil Contractors New Zealand to lead a code review process focusing primarily on service strikes. So together with the Centre for Vision and Learning, who facilitated a series of key stakeholder conversations, which involved a group with a really good cross-section across the industry. So we had a group of around 20 stakeholders that attended the workshop with a wider group of 40. The wider group consisted of over 800 years of experience with an average age in the industry of around 15 years, obviously 15 years within the infrastructure, the civil contracting and utility industry. This process involved 3 workshops over May, June and July, with experiments undertaken between the second and third workshops to test some of the outputs. 3 key priority areas were identified in relation to this, and in order of priority, they were increased transparency and access to asset data, introduction of minimum location standards, and clarity of roles and responsibilities, including best practice. The outputs from the workshop are now available on the NZUAG website, and a submission on behalf of this group is currently being prepared and will be made available on the NZUAG website prior to the end of the submission phase. I think one of the key points to highlight that regardless of what changes are adopted through the code review process, this will need to be followed with implementation and education. This is highlighted in the outputs pack and will need to be industry supported if we are to see any change. We've also looked internationally to see what approaches they have taken, to understand if there are any quick wins. And one of the key things to me that came out of the series of workshops, that while those involved, 92%, saw reductions of strikes as very important to their business, the wider group had a very differing view of what consisted of a strike. To really make progress in this area, we likely need a common understanding with clear but maybe aspirational targets. Code reporting. So this was established in the code as a means to inform the minister of its success or otherwise of the code. The requirements were included in the code, but the content of the report has been for the NZUAG to determine. The content was considered to be a reporting mechanism, but is not clear if it is value, as there has been limited feedback from either the minister or the industry itself. There is nothing to indicate who might be interested to read the report or if there is any value to members. The requirement that is mandatory in law, there has not been enough interest even to get the people who need to report to do so. It therefore comes down to who the people are who might actually want to read a report. If it is the members of the industry sector, what do they want to know that will provide value to them? If it is to add value, then the outcomes have to be of interest, as the sector will still probably need to provide the base data. How do we generate enough interest across the sector for members to do that, given they do not do it now on a mandatory basis? And as an aside, for those of you who are providing the reports for your employer, the request for information went out last week. A little bit more detail around the report. We've introduced a Part A and a Part B to the data we've collected over the last few years. Part A has been the key data collection set, which is set out in the code. And Part B has been questions that have come from the Code Effectiveness report that Ian will mention a bit more detail later on. The reports from previous years can be found on the NZUAG website under Code Compliance. But one of the questions we have asked over the last few years test the engagement of those working with the code towards the code. And that's commonly now measured as a Net Promoter Score. For those that respond, this is scored very highly, which shows good engagement with the code. But it's very difficult to really test it when the response rate, especially amongst utility operators, is so low. So the other side of the coin to utility strikes. It was understood that there is a legacy problem for the industry sector due to the poor state of records of utility locations. However, it was expected that when the code was approved, the focus on location data would mean the quality of data would improve and reduce the frequency of third-party strikes. What is coming through now anecdotally is that the situation has little changed and that the behaviours that led to poor location data are still happening despite being 10 years down the track. The code makes it clear that the asset owner is responsible for ensuring that new asset locations are properly recorded to the appropriate level of accuracy. A level of accuracy is suggested, but is not mandatory. It is now suggested that the whole aspect of recording your asset location should be mandatory and the asset owner should be liable for the accuracy of that location data. Part of the issue is that the suppliers have no drivers to make the effort to supply the data and no financial incentive. So they simply move on to the next paid work and the requirement gets overlooked. So our belief is aspirational policy is required to change the industry behaviour, especially now that we're seeing better digital tools that make the requirements quicker and less onerous. Asset owners should be demanding better location data as it is in their commercial interests that are affected with the poor data. So the question is, how do we get people to value the data enough to change that behaviour? For me, the code is about balance. We look to ensure that everything the board does, even today, we have one representative being a corridor manager and one being a utility. And even though I represent a utility, I believe the balance is not quite sitting right in regards to as-built and service strikes. And the key factor is, while we have unknown services, then we're always going to have strikes. Significant data is collected on project basis, only then to be discarded on completion of the project. How can the code make a platform to change this? So that's the end of the first section, and let's have a quick look.
I've just got a quick couple of questions then. So you're highlighting that you're not getting enough reporting back through utilities. So where are you getting the data to make these assumptions in the report then? Or are you just going on the data that's being reported?
So I think you're talking about in relation to the level of service strikes, or
yeah. Well, I'm just saying, like, I know for a fact in our space that you're highlighting there. What I was picking up there, maybe I'm picking up wrong or not, but you're saying the location data isn't quite right there. But is it the location data, or is it the people working in the road? Are they interpreting the data and all this type of thing, or getting the plans, or following procedures? I'm just trying to get a wee bit more info on that. Like, location is critical to hitting it, but where in the process is it actually falling over? That's what I'm trying to get to. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I understand what you're saying. So look, some of that's come through the workshops we've held. Some of that's come through previous education sessions we've held nationally, where we've gone to centres and invited code participants to come and talk through issues. And I'm obviously work for a national utility, and I'm probably very aware of some of the shortcomings with our own underground. So I think it's something that's been coming through anecdotally. It's something we've as we've gone into focus groups with these workshops, it's been discussed in more detail. So that, I don't think we've got exact data to point to it, but that's why we're probably looking for, obviously through this code review process, some submissions with supporting reasoning on change in this area.
Yes, and it'd be fair to say that a lot of the issues that come through to us are all about this area. It's the most fraught part, because it leads to the greatest amount of conflicts on the ground. And what we get the feedback from is a lot of the conflicts. And what we find is all of those things contribute to exactly why we have problems as an industry. And so it would be fair to say that it is a problem that we all share. And so as an industry, we need to take that really head on and do something about it.
So look, just having a quick look at the questions. Ed V has just suggested that asset owners should be liable for their asset data location and any costs associated with strikes borne by asset owner unless negligence is proven. And I do believe that that is one end of the dial that we can take, and this is obviously what the code review, submission process is for, to actually sort of test out those ideas. I do understand that with legacy data, this can be very difficult. It's certainly one that's come through quite strongly in the recent workshop sessions we've done. So Stephen Parker, he's just for asset data / as-built, who is checking the installation? We ask our suppliers to check installations, but they look at the traffic management more than the actual work. And I'm not sure, Stephen, whether you're talking about when you're auditing on site. Is that your point when you're auditing as a corridor manager or as a someone putting in utilities?
Yes, basically it is our corridor management or lack of it from our supplier end, from the state highway network. As I say, they primarily focus on the short-term risk, which is traffic management, more than the long-term asset data risk for installation and completion of work sign-off. Yes, it's frustrating on our end, but we have found when we do have checked on occasion where the install's not as per plan, and then we're assuming then the construction plan's actually just going in as built, but it's actually not in the right place. It's happened. It's only happened a couple of times, but that's only really because they've only checked a couple of times the actual physical works. They were just worried about the signs and cones more than anything else, which is, yeah.
I certainly agree, and I suppose just to answer your question, the owner of the asset should be, is responsible. But like you say, there is a lot of when auditing is undertaken, there are a lot of aspects to that auditing. Joanne's, is the new national data standard going to apply to all utility owners? That should help improve the accuracy of location data and asset data if national standards are applied. And agreed, Joanne, it's a very good point. And I think the code has put guidance around this before, but hasn't enforced it. It's not a must. So that is something that I think we'd certainly want to see some feedback on through this code review process. John's made the comment, it appears that Vodafone don't have their assets loaded into before you dig. Understand that FX network now focused are also not loaded. Can anyone confirm this is the case? I won't speak to individual, but I can confirm that not all utilities are in before you dig. And that is one of the issues that we do face at the moment. There's not one source of the truth to go and get asset data. Brian has said increasingly we have private services and road corridors. Also, Fonterra Pipes private water supply pipes, but their asset data is not captured anywhere that is publicly available. Perhaps an area to guide through the code. And I think that is the difficulty with the code, Brian. Is the code is between utility operators and corridor managers. Things like Fonterra or people putting in supply pipes, ducts for their own purposes. It's hard to manage through the code. My expectation in that any a council that's providing a license should provide an ability to then make those assets visible. But it is something that is difficult to capture with the code.
And it would be fair to say, Nick, that the biggest problem there is that with private utilities, the landowner changes from time to time, and those records may very easily get lost. And so you can't rely on the fact that that they're always identified. And so it sort of leaves it in a bit of a black hole, unless, of course, the road controlling authority has records at all of what is there. That's a question I know that we have struggled with ourselves, and so where is the best source of data? Still to be determined, I think, is the answer to that.
Sorry, Ed Varley here from Thames Coromandel. Any private service in road reserve should require a licence to occupy.
Yep.
And that should be a permanent record held by the road controlling authority.
Right. And do you have a central recording of all of those?
We do, yes.
Okay, you're very, very lucky. We have the ability to do that ourselves. You're quite right that we do have licenses. It's a question of how well they're recorded and how well they can be recalled and how far back they go.
Well, for us, it goes back 2 years, and we try and record them in RAM.
Right.
Ian, Brian Hudson here. My observation is that, yes, we are issuing licenses for these things, but because they don't appear on any mapping system, or if somebody is applying to dig in the road corridor, it doesn't, there's no link to it, they're not searched for. So unless somebody sees something on the roadside, a big warning notice or something, it's likely to still be not known and not located. So it's that link between a license and where do you store the data that's then publicly available for somebody searching for underground services. That's the issue.
That's a good point, Tim. And also planning, planning for the work. But the license isn't visible. So I think that's a very good point. Ed, you've also made the point that Before You Dig is not a national database commercial platform, which that is correct. Hamish makes the point that even when accurate data is provided, we're still seeing strikes. Certainly agree with you, Hamish. I think one of the points, and I think it came through quite clearly for me in the workshops, that if all the data is known, contractors often, we would see great precautions taken around a gas pipe or a power, where next door there was a known chorus asset, but because of the issues, the basically the effects of having a chorus duct is far less than the other two, the same precautions weren't taken. So that was probably the inconsistency I was talking about. And while there is unknown assets in the corridor, this always, I think, is going to skew the contractor's view to how much, they can take all the precautions in the world, yet there's an unknown asset there. But if we work towards knowing all assets in the corridor, it narrows that ability, that mindset. So that's probably the bit I highlighting in one of the levers to reducing strikes. Ed also just talked about it's mandatory and what organisations have powers to raise non-compliant issues and raise fines. Well, the corridor manager can, and there are some examples. Your larger cities do this. I think probably you just need to look at how your mechanism for doing that. You probably need to advertise these costs as you're in your annual plan. But there are mechanisms for doing this, and it's already been done. Look, I think, Ian, I might pass over to you. I think there's just a couple other comments, but we might pick that up as the next question time.
Indeed. Let's carry on. So if you jump out and I share my screen. Can you see that, Nick? Yes.
Yes.
Right. So over the, sorry?
Put it into, can you put it into PowerPoint, mate? That just means everyone can see the full screen.
I thought I was. Just, I'll jump out
in the other screen then.
I'm not sure I can.
All right, well, it's visible anyway.
Okay, I'll carry on. Well, that's the problem, I guess, with Zoom. I can't actually see what I'm looking at on the screen. You should be looking at a cartoon. Is that what you can see? Nick?
Yep. You're
okay.
Bang on. You're on. Yeah.
Right, I'll carry on then. Okay. This one is a matter that really we just think should be quick and easy to sort out. The problem with this is that we are not seeing what should be happening, and maybe that's a result of the fact that the code itself is not clear. Basically, the government wanted us to have conflict of interest sorted out as part of the process. We've done that by including it, concluding the Department of Internal Affairs guidelines for conflict of interest in the code, and that requires people to make a statement. Now, it's limited to just the two aspects, where a road controlling authority is also a utility operator, and where the utility operator operates more than one type of utility. But what we realise, and the code doesn't spell out, is that changes is a matter of course. Change is happening all the time, and in this case, change needs to be matched by action. And what I mean by that is those aspects that I've just identified, they change from time to time. And what we're seeing is the investment or divestment of interest. In other words, where an organisation changes its interests, either by increasing those interests or decreasing those interests. And when that happens, of course, it impacts on the conflict of interest. If, for example, the conflict of interest basically goes away. And one of the best examples of this will be when Three Waters reforms come in, if they come in. That's a bit presumptive, but if they come in, then in a lot of cases for corridor managers, they are unlikely to have secondary interests. And they will not, in that situation, need a conflict of interest statement, in which case they should withdraw them. But also you get the issue with the utility operators changing what they're invested in. Vector is a classic example of that. They have both invested and divested their interests over time, expanding their area of interest outside of Auckland and outside of their original industry position. And then they have divested some of those as well. So in fact, their conflict of interest statement should have been reformatted a number of times. To be honest, that is something that we have as an organisation not followed up all that well. But as I say, the code doesn't cover the process very well for making those changes. If we are going to be clear, then what we need is a better way of ensuring that what's happening on the industry is recorded in a proper manner. And it really is one of the aspects, if you like, about how do we make the code more effective? Although it's a very small aspect of it. What we did as a group was we got the industry together into a working group. It was good that we had volunteers from right across the industry who were prepared to get together and work on this. We funded a consultant to lead this for us to make sure that it happened and that everybody had an opportunity for input. I can say that we have a very good report. It's on the website. I direct your attention to it. Suggest you go and have a look. But basically, there are 3 outcomes that they are pointing to us to working on: education, coordination, and of course that old enigma, conditions, special conditions, reasonable conditions. In order to make progress on this, though, it becomes an issue, as you imagine. How do we put in the role, the resources, and the budget to make sure this is delivered? And when we were trying to do this, of course, COVID jumped on us in a big way, and it's had a big effect on how we actually deliver it. What we've done, though, is given the priority to education and training. We think, given the previous discussions we've had as an industry, that is the focus that seems to be on everybody's mind. It's a good opportunity, though, through the review to say whether you agree with that or not. What we're trying to do as an organisation is deliver some form of online training. What we're finding is that when we go around the country, we get maybe 20 to 30 people in an area who come together and are prepared to listen to us when we're doing education aspects. But we think there is a way of reaching further out into the industry. And also, as far as the original report goes, there were wider recommendations, and there's a lot that could be developed. We're looking at what can be put into the review at the current time, but there's also the need of the industry as a whole to consider how we might address this and make improvements overall. And that then reflects on what is the value that NZUAG itself delivers. I mean, NZUAG was invented by the industry. It was a form of improving liaison at a national level by getting the various industry groups to talk to each other. It also meant that when industry was looking for someone to develop and manage the code, that there was a group that could be pointed at. We were basically directed to do that, but is that all that you want? I mean, what's there is the sorts of things that we do. Of course, it's always going to be limited by the fact that NZUAG of itself only consists really of the board, and it's a voluntary group, which means that you're looking for people to make time to do this for you. And the question then is, and I guess the first one, if we're going to increase the value of NZUAG, it's the first thing you want, NZUAG. If it's just the code and the management of it that you want, well, I guess you could ask government to do that. Of course, I'm not sure what the outcome would be. And we put that question to people. They're not sure that they want government involved in it either. So I guess the question is really, if you want NZUAG to carry on with that mandate, what are the other things that you're really looking for from us to give you value as an organisation? We sort of wonder at times, because we find it hard to get people to front up and be part of whatever we're working on, to be members and to pay the little bit that we're actually asked for membership. But if you want those aspects, then there is an aspect of the industry really being part and parcel of this. So what are the things that people might consider are missing out of the whole equation? And in particular, we use the RIMS conference as our way of getting together as an industry, because we don't have a pan-industry conference ourselves. And are you interested in continuing to support that? Because we don't get the kind of participation that really could be improving the whole value of that. So do we continue to support it? Shall we take some more questions there, Nick?
Certainly, look, just as a bit of an update that's come through the questions here, there's obviously there's a few sort of comments and sort of questions around before you dig, and also some statements around where other asset data has been sort of held. I think the points are all very well made. I think they're actually, I think Ross Malcolm's probably on this call, but there's a good reason the way before you dig came about. You know, as a platform, and I think when it originally was brought into New Zealand, there was great adoption by both the corridor managers and utility operators. Over time, this hasn't been maintained, and that I think is one of the biggest failings, I think, with Before You Dig, although I mean, Before You Dig has been very active over the last few years and made a lot of changes, and I think which make it easier to use. And I think, Darren, your comment around those that are not familiar with the service, how difficult it is, you know, that's something I'll certainly pass directly to Before You Dig, and I certainly know that that's not their aim. Their aim is for ease of use. So Darren just makes a comment that it's hard for those that don't normally use it to set up an account and common email addresses may not be recognised. So, you know, they're doing a one-off job and it gets too hard for them to sign up. I've also loaded in the question link just something around the initiative, the subsurface initiative Wellington City Council currently underway with, and they've been certainly pushing that very hard. This is probably on the back of the Let's Get Wellington Moving. A lot of work's happening in the area, a lot of issues with underground services. So it's certainly worth a watch, but that is probably something that where there is change sort of underway.
Yes,
and so then,
one thing we could do, I suppose, Nick, is spread the information around. I know it's a huge exercise for Wellington City, and it's very, very costly, and that may put it out of the realms of some of the smaller authorities. But if there are lessons that can be learned, then as an industry, we really need to make sure that we communicate those.
Yeah, no, I just think.
Final.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to just say, like, Wellington City Council, it's our involvement as well, and we're happy to share data to anyone. I think one of the biggest challenges around the data, and it's the same with data before you dig, is it's not mandatory for anybody to supply data to anyone at the moment, and it's something that needs to be considered, and it probably does sit quite well with the local authority, but if Wellington do a good job in that, that should be rolled out nationally. And any data, I know that we're quite lucky at data, as we've only had our assets since the late 90s, but we used to have stuff before we saw the LPG, it was 100-year-old. You'll have poor data, but it doesn't matter if it's poor data, you just need to put it into the system, and it'll get better over time as people expose sites and report back. And if you have that sharing when a hole is dug and excavated, that whatever's in that hole was shared back to the asset owners, it's going to make the data more better over time. And I think that's the biggest challenge for the whole area, is initially having some formal mandatory place where you have to present your data. So if I'm in Wellington, part of my deal with working in Wellington is I should have to give them all my GIS data, any data that I've got in regards to operating in their system. And that's one way in making it easier. And the other big challenge, I think, is with Dell Before You Dig's great for contractors because they don't get charged. And any system going forward, and I've already raised that with Wellington, that is you can't charge people to access that data. They're digging up the roads or contractors and all that. It's got to be a free service that benefits the contractors. I think Wellington are taking it for the approach that they see the roads getting dug up all the time. They want to be able to plan it and all that as well. So I'll be interested to see what pans out. But there could be competition in that kind of market going forward, which isn't great because you want it all a centralized source. That's just my view. So.
Certainly agree, Craig. I think you probably highlighted two of the key issues, though, is standard of data and funding arrangements. So these are probably some of the big challenges.
And the third thing, I think, Nick, is a process for dealing with unexpected utilities that are exposed while you're working. You know, how do you record it? At the moment, it's too much trouble, so the contractor just fills the hole in again and forgets about it. How do we actually pick up? I mean, Craig raised a good point that it will improve, but it'll only improve if the information is passed on.
Just back to that in the chat function, Ed's just sort of put a couple of points there, sort of identify NZUAG need, does it need a new role, what resources we needed, what budget is available, and can it be self-financing by charging for corridor access requests, and just not that I can answer all those yet, but just as a bit of news, I assume we could. We've just brought on a new independent chair, Jim Donnelly, and I believe at our last meeting, Ian, those were effectively the exact questions he was asking. So I think we're on that sort of same page around that. So a very good point.
Yeah, I think they're great questions too, Nick. And the beauty is we may not be able to give you the answers right now, but it is the questions that we want to explore. And if they are the same ones that are coming out from the industry, then it shows there's a degree of alignment and that we can work as a group to improve things.
And Brian is noted corridor access management is becoming increasingly complex for most RCAs in recent years because of growth and all that's going on. And he's said he's not sure RCAs are keeping up with resource levels, expertise, training, and recovering the revenue needed to manage well. He believes step change is needed in the code help if all parties involved know what it is all about. So he supports accessible online interactive training, and agree with you, Brian. I think all those points are well made. I think one thing that, and funnily enough, talking to Wellington City Council as part of their works, is the corridor management component got sort of overtaken by the traffic management component. So while the code obviously said that COPTIM must be followed, what we tended to find is a lot of RCAs then put a TMC in charge. So the focus really has become around the traffic management component rather than the actual corridor management component, which is set out in the code. So that is certainly something that I think people, there needs to be more understanding of what the role, what specific roles are.
Shall I carry on, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Ian.
Because you just gave me a good swag in to the next topic. Because COPTIM is going to change. We know that. The biggest problem with it is that we have all these wonderful traffic management plans all laid out, and what's happening is people are just doing it as a tick box exercise. But the diagrams are of lovely straight pieces of road, and that's not what we get. So there's little thought going into how the whole thing is being done, and whether the risk that we're taking is acceptable. And at the end of the day, everybody ends up dealing with the non-compliance with COPTIM, what COPTIM actually says, because COPTIM says that you've got to look at it on a risk-based approach, and that's not what we were doing. But when they do that change, the code is going to have to change as well. As Nick just said, basically the code talks about complying with COPTIM. But if COPTIM is saying that you're actually going to have to do a whole lot more yourselves and do a whole lot of thinking, then what do we need to put in the utilities code to be able to deal with that and think of how we might do it on a risk-based approach? Some aspects are going to end up in other standards because they're not going to carry everything over. And if you want to know what I mean by that, I've had one come across my desk in the last couple of days, which is all of the safety clothing, and also most of the other safety gear will come across in other standards. So we know that there are some things that are going to end up separate. And then the question is, as an industry, are we going to adopt them? Or are we going to have our own standards? I can tell you that the safety clothing one is basically just what's currently really in Copton itself. So it's not a change. That one might that we might decide to adopt on a national basis rather than have to reinvent things. And there's going to be some aspects of that we need to think about, in which case we might need to include them by reference in the code. And of course, with anything where we're going to get that level of change, there's the possibility of having to have training requirements that are part and parcel of it. And with Copton, we know in the past we've had to have certificates and cards and what have you. So does that mean that everything that we've been doing has to be done again? Those aspects are still not clear to me. And I think there are aspects that we will need to pick up clearly and develop further in the code. And this hoary old aspect that comes up just about every time, the whole question of reasonable conditions. And there you've got a summary of really what the code is saying at the moment. We should all understand that. But what we're finding is, for example, the code seems to suggest that the template of general conditions is the be-all and end-all. So if there are other legitimate conditions that would meet the criteria in the legislation for reasonable conditions, they're being included as locals and specials, and it's appropriate time for us to think about whether there's gaps in the template or the code itself that should take over from these conditions, because one of the complaints that we always seem to get is the huge size of the list of conditions that get attached. And it's an opportunity to see if there are things that we can do that would reduce the size of those lists. So what we're looking for is for examples of the types of conditions that we can put to an industry group, discuss and agree. What we don't want is things that duplicate the existing code requirements. And that might also be the case where if we make changes that might impact on people's lists of conditions, and it may impact on the template itself. But what we need is the conditions that people are using, and they use reasonably often, because if they're doing that, then it is more a case of being a general condition. But don't forget, the code does have criteria around what's needed to be reasonable, and the legislation is emphasizing on the fact that things need to be reasonable. So I would point to you very much at taking the aspects out of the code that give you guidance on what should and shouldn't be a condition. What do we have, Nick? We keep going with the list here.
Thanks, Ian. Look, a few comments really. I think just really supporting that shared data. Stephen talks about my work sites, and look, there are some good systems. Now, it's not only my work site, it's also RAM, as well as Before You Dig. So these are all systems that have a national presence and could be utilised. Craig's made a comment just around his role and what he does at the TMC, and I think that does highlight, you know, the point I think we're making, that, you know, the focus from a lot of councils is that the the focus is really around the safety and the of the undertaking of the work. There's also a few comments around global cars, and I believe they are good ones. I suppose the code does set out a bit of guidance around global cars, and I think it's a point. You know, the idea of a global car was of repeatable work, you know, of low impact in the road corridor was the sort of driver for the introduction of them, which, I mean, in my expectation means you shouldn't be putting in a lot of network, but this varies nationally. I think the point that's made there around, especially by, sorry, Watkit, I'm not sure of the name, but is the code addressing the reporting and requirements around global cars. I think what the code was aimed at here was to lay a platform for global cars, but it should still be at an agreed process between the corridor manager and the utility. And I suppose, without being painful about it, I think if these performances metrics aren't being met, i.e. reporting or what's been undertaken under the global car, then there's not a right for the corridor manager to grant a global car. So, I mean, not that you want to use the stick, but that is a method to gain, you know, the level of, I suppose, performance levels that we're hoping to, that the, you know, that the corridor manager requires, and the utility should require as well.
Yes, they're not a given right. They were introduced to try and reduce some of the admin and the red tape. But you're right, there should be a process around it, because the last thing you want is, even though it's minor stuff with low impact, is for them to turn up and find that there's somebody else working on the road. So, I mean, part of it is the notification process as well. So there are aspects around global cars, and the expectation is there still has to be some discipline, and you know, the rights, there are no rights to have them. A lot of it will depend on behaviours. If there's a good relationship between the two parties, the corridor manager and the utility operator, and everything's done sensibly, then I would expect that there is no problem. And you're right, Nick, they might even want to expand it a little. And that's all to do with how well people perform overall.
Yeah, and I think it's just reply to get around that point, Ian, that part of the reason RCAs allow global cars is around the resource. You know, they don't have the resource to take individual cars for repetitive work. So it may be a bit of an empty threat of removing the global car due to resource concerns, which I certainly agree that this is a difficult problem. There are a number of sort of comments around NZUAG TTM and COPTM, and I think we are very aware of the issues coming with that. The code does point to COPTM, and I suppose we're still, you know, we're certainly hoping that there'll be some submissions that will provide some guidance in there, but we're going to have to look at what we're currently pointing at with the code, with these changes that are coming. And so I think that's high on our list of future issues coming. I think just the one from Orion, and it is a very good point that he's made here around the assets significantly of age, you know, could be 100 years, and they were installed to all standards at that time. Things do change, and he's also noted that the code is not retrospective. So he's, sorry, he or she, I'm not totally sure, but his point is the guide for safety with underground services, which obviously the code does as well. I suppose the point I would probably raise, and having a little bit of an insight with my current role, is when a strike occurs to a service that's not in the position that the undergrounds are shown, does the utility operator then have an obligation to update those records? And that is a mandatory sort of obligation under the code. And in my experience, that's not occurring. And that's probably the point that we talk about with, you know, there'd be an expectation for service records to improve over time, but that's probably one of the anecdotal sort of statements we're seeing that isn't the case.
And if there is a need for a process there, if anybody's got ideas about how we should actually do that better as an industry, then we'd love to get your submission, pointing out how that might be dealt with in a better fashion and in a more consistent manner. I'll carry on, shall I, Nick?
Yes.
Okay, so what we really would like is for people to respond to us. We think it's a good opportunity to make some good improvements to the code. There are some things that we need to look at and improve, and there are changes that are going to impact on us. So we're looking to you as an industry to help us to do this better. As we've done before, we're going to do this in a two-part process. The process will be open to the public, but what we're looking at is to get the suggested changes in, develop a draft version of the proposed code, and then put it out there to get everybody to have the opportunity to submit on what's there, because what we want, as per usual, is to make sure that what we have at the end of the day is a balanced outcome. And so there will be, as you can imagine, two sets of views, and we're going to have to develop something in the middle. If we get something that everybody hates, maybe we've got the right answer. We will keep Treasury involved in the process. They're taking an overview. This is a statutory process. And at the end of the day, the Minister will have to sign off the changes. They have considered in the past that we run a good process. We want to make sure that that continues. So what we intend to do is start with these webinars. This is the second and final one. What we're looking for is to run that first round with submissions closing on the 7th of October. We'll look to run the second round. We'll make sure that everybody is kept up to date. Don't forget the fact that we have all the information and ongoing information on our website. We hope to have the maybe the second round going out in December, although I'd really like to avoid that because Christmas is something that everybody complains about when you run stuff over that period. So we'll have to see how our timing goes to see if we can improve that. But we'll be looking certainly at the end of the year or very early in the new year to get into the second round. After that, of course, we'll run the normal process of doing the update and seeking the approvals. But I have to tell you that it's unlikely with the whole process, taking into account what's likely to happen next year. And don't forget, we will have to make sure that our timing takes into account the elections. So we'd like really to get through the process before the elections happen, or it's actually going to have a big impact on us. So at the end of the day, this is what the code is to us. It's critical, it's balanced. We need to do something about compliance, because if you didn't get the gist of all of this, the biggest issue that we have is behaviours. We need to look at, as an industry, how we do this better. I would say this is a good opportunity for everybody. I think it's important. And hopefully we have put in enough time in the process for you to have a good deal of say in what the outcomes are likely to be. Don't forget the contact point. If you just go into our website, whether you go direct, I can tell you that if you Google NZUAG, you will get the organisation anyway, and you can find the code page very easily on our website. Do we have any more questions, Nick? How are we going for time? We're a little bit...
Not bad. Look, I'll just round out what's in the chat. Brian makes a very good point around local conditions, obviously sort of bringing up relevant information that can be buried in other documents, infrastructure development codes, etc. So you know, it's of benefit of making the utilities and their agents aware of these. And Lauren's also commented again around the awareness of the code. She believes it's very low among contractors where the principal utility is aware. So that is one of the challenges. I wondered if there were any other questions, if anyone wanted to, as we've got a little bit of time.
We've got a couple more popping up. Agree the code should be agnostic on how traffic management is delivered. I would say that it's a matter for all parties. I'm not sure that I would say that the corridor manager has to set a requirement by law. I would say that this is all tied up by the Health and Safety at Work Act. And in terms of that, all of the parties are involved in the process. And so that's why it's important that we cover it in the code, so that that everybody is taking responsibility.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I believe that you're referring to the difference between NZ GTTM and the old COPTM standard, or whatever standard the local authority chooses to adopt for traffic management within its road controlling area.
Yeah, that's correct, Ed. I don't think the code, should quote COPTM or any other guide document. It will just say that traffic management for safety of both the workers and the public, and traffic has to be provided. And local authorities, are required by the Local Government Act when any work's done on a road to make sure the protection's in place. Plus, we've got to meet the requirements of Health and Safety and Employment Act.
Yeah, I believe the phrase you're looking for is should be in accordance with the traffic management code adopted by the local road controlling authority.
Yeah, yep, that words like that would do.
Yeah, I guess the issue that was raised came from the contractors themselves, that they wanted actually something to be specified because they get all sorts of things.
All right, we won't specify NZUAG TTM, we'll just use Coptum.
If that's what you want, it will, of course, no longer, Coptum will no longer be supported. So I guess that whole issue of training and stuff like that will become an issue. I, at the end of the day, would be quite happy to make it agnostic, but it would mean that if you were doing a long install and you went across boundaries, you might have several different codes of practice to apply. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the contractors in the first place wanted a single code of practice to apply for traffic management. And I guess the question then is, do we want that, or do we just want something that says exactly what you're talking about, which is that the various acts require that there be input?
It's a good point, though, and one we could probably go for hours on with differing views. But I think in my view, one of the successes of the adoption of Coptum was it being mandated in the code. One of the key, doing a majority of the work is in the road corridor is utilities. So having that there gave a good platform. But I also understand, one of the other key things about the code is trying to get consistency nationally, and we're heading to a point where we're going to see that consistency disappear, which will be a real challenge for contractors, corridor managers, and utilities. Ed, I just noticed you put, does NZ, I assume you mean NZUAG, have a team site set up to pass information? No, if that's what you were asking, I think we tend to do it through our website. There is ability to raise questions on that. We've got obviously a page around the code review. We will keep posting information, from these webinars or other bits of relevant information we think is worth highlighting as part of the code review.
Yeah, it was NZUAG. What I was thinking more about the passing information is we've got multiple local authorities and service providers around the area. We're all potentially coming up with different solutions to the same problem. And it could be beneficial to actually have a site, a forum, whatever you want to call it, where we could actually, if we have an issue, we can pose that to the industry or to local authorities across the country and see if anyone else has had the same issue and what they've done with it. This wouldn't be directly related to the code, but would be a method to share information and come up with standardized solutions.
Yeah, I have to say, Ed, that I agree. It's something that we've talked about for a while, how we might have some sort of industry portal. Not sure whether we would do it through Teams, but how we might actually set up an interactive process. I'm not sure that we've made the kind of progress on that you want, quite frankly, but it's certainly on our radar. And we've got Craig. You can write both in code as NZTA are going to implement NZG, TTM, and local councils staying with Coptum. Okay.
Yeah, look, I could sort of probably throw, and I'll probably do it since I've got the speaking ticket, a second, we can end this call. But I think there's been a lot of chatter around, and I've attended and had a good chat to some of those that are driving this change. But on the other side of this is the utilities as well, and the discussions I've had, although we see a lot of shortcomings with the implementation, NZG TTM does align, I think, more closely with the Health and Safety Work Act, and that's where we feel there's a real benefit. So what we're likely to, for Chorus being a national sort of provider, if we're looking at NZG TTM and looking at implementing that across our agents, I mean, if it's seen as best practice, it would be it's going to be an interesting conversation with local councils if we're saying this is the approach we want to do to manage traffic. So it can, it's going to be quite a challenging sort of next 6 months, I believe, in at least in this space.
Yeah, I agree, Nick. And for a national organisation, you've probably got significant resources and advantages and employ larger contractors. But when the local plumber rocks up and he wants to do a sewer connection and he looks at NZ, Guide to Temporary Traffic Management, he's going to read through it and then he's going to ask the council, what the hell do I do? Because this gives me I don't know which sign to use. I don't know how many cones I'm going to need for a taper. So Copton really fills that niche for that relatively low risk and the types of works that happen very, very commonly every day. They're going on at scores of locations on our local authority roads, and Copton is just perfect for that, for those small contractors and operators who may never have the resources and skills to operate at that much higher level. So it does provide a really, really good resource for that.
Yeah, well made point. Very good. To reach the natural conclusion, do you want to round us out, Ian? And
yes, I can do that. Thank you all for coming. Let me give you a few more minutes back in your day. Some good discussion. Look forward to getting your submissions in. Appreciate your time and your participation.